J.J. Abrams' Star Trek fixed one Spock problem that was always the saddest part of his Vulcan story. J.J. Abrams' Star Trek 2009 fixed one of the saddest aspects of Spock's Leonard Nimoy life in Star Trek's prime timeline. Commander Spock Zachary Quinto lives a different life in the alternate Kelvin timeline than the Prime Universe's Ambassador Spock, who he met at the end of Star Trek 2009. Quinto's Spock suffered an unimaginable loss when the villainous Romulan time traveler, Nero Eric Bana, blew up Vulcan. Yet Quinto's Spock also seemingly doesn't share one lifelong regret of Nimoy's Vulcan. Spock is the son of Ambassador Sarek, played by Mark Lenard in Star Trek's Prime Timeline, and Ben Cross in J.J. Abrams' Kelvin Timeline. Star Trek, the original series, revealed that Spock and Sarek were estranged for 20 years because of the son's decision to join Starfleet instead of the Vulcan Science Academy. Star Trek Discovery retconned Spock's family, adding Michael Burnham Sonequa Martin Green as Sarek's human foster daughter. Burnham and Sarek were revealed to have a closer relationship than Spock and his father ever did. J.J. Abrams' Star Trek fixed Spock's estrangement from his father, Sarek. Fascinatingly, Spock and Sarek don't seem to share the broken relationship in J.J. Abrams' Star Trek as the two Vulcans have in the Prime Universe. Early in Star Trek 2009, Sarek counsels a young Spock, Jacob Kogan, who is ostracized and bullied by his peers for being half-human. Sarek understood that his decision to marry a human, Amanda Grayson Winona Ryder, resulted in Spock's dilemma. Yet Sarek told Spock, "You are fully capable of deciding your own destiny." Amanda's death and Vulcan's destruction seem to be the Kelvin timeline substitution for Spock having a broken relationship with Sarek in Star Trek's Prime Timeline. The tragic death of Amanda Grayson in Star Trek 2009 is also another huge difference in the lives of Zachary Quinto's Spock and his Prime Timeline counterpart. Leonard Nimoy's Spock didn't lose his mother or his homeworld. Amanda's death and Vulcan's destruction seem to be the Kelvin timeline substitution for Spock having a broken relationship with Sarek in Star Trek's Prime Timeline. What happened to Spock and Sarek's relationship in Star Trek's Prime Timeline? After Star Trek, the original series, Spock and Sarek came to an accord, although they still never became particularly close. In his later years, Spock stepped away from Starfleet and followed in Sarek's footsteps as an ambassador to the United Federation of Planets. Meanwhile, the aging Sarek's health decreased. In Star Trek: The Next Generation, Sarek died of Bindi syndrome while Spock was on Romulus working toward unification with the Vulcan people. For decades, Spock has stood as one of the most iconic figures in science fiction, a symbol of logic battling emotion, of intellect veiled in restraint. But behind his sharp eyebrows and calm demeanor was always a thread of tragedy, not in his actions, but in his identity. He was a man of two worlds, never fully belonging to either. Leonard Nimoy's portrayal in Star Trek, the original series, laid bare this painful duality. But it took J.J. Abrams' 2009 Star Trek reboot to finally give Spock a different path, one that healed a wound that had lingered for over 40 years. The tragedy of belonging. The Spock we met in the original series was, in many ways, a tortured character. Half Vulcan, half human, he leaned hard into his Vulcan heritage, suppressing his human side, especially his emotions, because the world he came from judged him for it. On Vulcan, he was too human, his mixed heritage made him the target of ridicule, and even his father, Sarek, showed visible disappointment in his son's emotional tendencies. On Earth and in Starfleet, he was too Vulcan, distant, cold, unreadable. This feeling of not truly belonging anywhere defined Spock's character for much of the franchise. It wasn't just a passing theme, it was his emotional anchor. While Captain Kirk had his charm and Bones had his heart, Spock was caught between a species that discouraged emotion and a culture that demanded it. He was constantly forced to navigate a social landscape that had no space for someone like him. And that perhaps was the saddest part of Spock's Vulcan story, the feeling that his very existence was a compromise, never celebrated for what he was, only judged for what he wasn't. Enter J.J. Abrams' Spock. When J.J. Abrams rebooted the Star Trek franchise in 2009, he faced a daunting task. He had to reimagine legendary characters for a new generation while honoring what came before. His solution? A bold time travel narrative that created a new timeline, the Kelvin timeline, allowing familiar characters to make new choices and face new consequences. Zachary Quinto's Spock was still recognizably the same conflicted half-Vulcan, but Abrams did something different. He gave Spock a chance to confront, and ultimately embrace, both sides of himself in a way that felt honest and empowering. No longer just the outsider trying to conform, this Spock began to recognize that his human side wasn't a burden, it was a strength. Vulcan's destruction, a paradoxical freedom. One of the most shocking moments in the 2009 Star Trek film was the destruction of Vulcan. It was a massive narrative gamble, obliterating the homeworld of one of the franchise's founding species. But in a paradoxical twist, this devastation gave Spock something he never had before: clarity and autonomy. Without a home planet to return to, and with his mother Amanda tragically lost in the chaos, Spock was untethered from the expectations and judgments of traditional Vulcan society. This freed him in an emotional sense. Rather than living to meet the standards of a society that never fully accepted him, he could finally begin defining himself on his own terms. The Vulcan orthodoxy was gone, and with it, the suffocating weight of having to choose between being Vulcan or being human. He could be both, not just genetically, but spiritually and emotionally. The power of two Spocks. Abrams' greatest storytelling coup may have been bringing Leonard Nimoy back as Spock Prime. This allowed the narrative to bridge the generations and, symbolically, to offer a kind of healing. The older Spock became a mentor figure, not just to Quinto's younger self, but to the audience. In one pivotal conversation, Spock Prime tells Kirk that young Spock must find his own way, even if it deviates from what came before. It's a beautiful moment of passing the torch, but more importantly, it frames Quinto's Spock not as a mere copy of the original, but as someone with a chance to resolve the internal war that had haunted Spock Prime his entire life. This dual Spock dynamic turned what could have been a fan service gimmick into a meaningful dialogue between past and present, offering a sense of evolution and emotional progress. A love story that was never allowed. Another way Abrams' Star Trek fixed Spock's sadness was through his relationship with Uhura. In the original series, there were moments that hinted at mutual respect and possible affection between Spock and Uhura, but they were never explored. Cultural norms of the 1960s and the constraints of network television left such possibilities off the table. But in the reboot, the relationship between Spock and Uhura was front and center, and it wasn't just romantic fluff. Their love added dimension to both characters, especially Spock. Uhura saw the emotional depth within him and accepted it. She didn't expect him to hide or suppress it. This acceptance offered Spock something no one else had: unconditional regard for both his human and Vulcan halves. For once, he was seen not as a hybrid to be pitied or judged, but as a whole person to be loved. Choosing humanity without abandoning Vulcan. By the end of Star Trek Into Darkness, we see a Spock who is actively engaging with his emotions, not always easily, but with purpose. He allows himself to feel anger, grief, love, and fear, and he acts on those feelings. When Kirk dies in the climax of Into Darkness, the raw emotion in Spock's scream of "Khan," while divisive for some fans, marked a powerful shift. This